Hello and welcome to the Scoreboard Podcast. I'm your host, Rivka Boord of Jets X Factor, the home of the best New York Jets content on the internet. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to jetsxfactor.com, discount code 80, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, well, I haven't been live in a while, but I felt like I had to come on to talk about just the last day plus and just what's gone on. So I guess the best way to describe what my reaction was when I heard that the Jets had fired head coach Robert Saleh. Comes from Gary Thorne, 1986, for any Met fans here. After Bill Buckner's error let the Mets win Game 6, he said, "The crowd is in stunned disbelief." And that's kind of what I felt like. Not because I didn't think it was deserved, and not that I didn't think it should happen. I was just flabbergasted that it actually did happen. Because, again, Woody Johnson, in his 25 years as Jets owner, had never fired a head coach during the season. I mean, that includes Adam Gase. Some of the Jets coaching has been horrific. They've had some terrible seasons, and yet he had the forbearance not to fire until the season was over. So it's kind of astonishing how he gave a mulligan to Saleh after last season, and then 5 games into the year with the Jets 2-3 and having an opportunity to go on Monday Night Football and beat a divisional opponent and take the division lead. It's astonishing that at that point Woody just decided to pull the trigger. So again, my first reaction was just shock, but my next reaction was, I'm happy. I mean, I called for Saleh to be fired after last season. I mean, I called for Douglas to be fired too. I thought they were a package deal, but specifically Saleh. I mean, after the offseason Douglas had, I was willing to give him some, leash to see how the season went out. But Saleh, I mean, I thought he deserved to be fired again before the season. And I think that his mindset was what was holding the Jets back. And we'll get into it more, and I'm not convinced that everything's going to suddenly be great, but I was 100% convinced that this had to be done. I'm glad that Johnson did not wait until after the Bills game, because this is a pivotal turning point in the season. Again, it's not that they couldn't come back from being 2-4 and losing to the Bills. They could, but there is a tremendous difference between being 2-4 and being 3-3. Beating the Bills at home is a very, very important thing, especially because in order to win this division, they will have to go over 500 most likely against the division for the first time. I mean, I think since 2010. I think they were 3-3 in 2015, but they've been under 500 in the division ever since. I don't think they've ever gone more than 4-2 since the last time they made the playoffs, or more than 3-3, gone at least 4-2 since the last time they made the playoffs. And so they absolutely, I mean, this is a very critical game. And I have to say, I was not at all looking forward to having Robert Saleh bring the Jets into that game. And so I'm all on board with it. I don't care about all the other narratives. We'll talk about whether he was a scapegoat. We'll talk about whether Rodgers was involved in it. And Rodgers had some very interesting things to say on the McAfee show today about what will happen. And so, but still, just in a vacuum, just looking at the decision, I think it was the right call. Now let's get into some of the narrative surrounding the Saleh fight. So first of all, I think that the chief question that Jets fans have and people around the league have is just, how is this going to fix the offense? I mean, according to Connor Hughes, SNY, that was what Jets players' reaction was too. Because the defense, I mean, I don't think the defense looks as good as it did last year. They still have problems with their pass rush. But ultimately, statistically speaking, and just in how they shut down a high-flying Vikings offense. So, again, the defense is doing its job for the most part. It's the offense that's really not doing its job. Saleh was involved more on the defensive side of the football. Yeah, I know he said he was more involved in offense. Give me a break. This was not Saleh's offense. Again, he gets a lot of credit for what he did on the defensive side of the ball, but ultimately, he's not the offensive play caller. He's not designing the offense. And so, how is this going to fix the offense? Now, I have to defer to Robbie Sabo, the owner and founder of Jets X Factor, because I just think he's been pounding this drum since the beginning of last year, if not before. And he just said it better than I ever can. Just about, he said a lot of different things about how the Jets, just how their mindset is killing them, and that starts with the head coach. One thing he said is that divorcing the idea of the offensive coordinator from the head coach's, then the head coach's, from the head coach's philosophy is a mistake, because ultimately the head coach sets, especially a head coach who is supposed to be a CEO type, what does he set if not for the team's philosophy in the game? He's not game planning. And so his whole mindset permeates the team on both sides of the ball. And look, one of the issues the Jets have had is that they come out slowly, very slowly on both sides of the ball. In the last, they've had a few times where they start picking it up later. But ultimately, I mean, look, they were down 17-0 before they could blink an eye. Again, they've always been starting slowly, and that falls on the head coach. The other thing that falls on the head coach is the penalties, which have just gotten worse. The Jets are the most penalized team in the NFL since the beginning of last season. He keeps saying how it has to get better, and then it gets worse. And it's not just individual players. That's the thing. When you have, again, you have your running back being called for 2 false starts. And again, as much as I put that on Brees, and I know Rodgers' cadence is confusing, but again, the accountability, he tried to remove players with false starts during training camp, but it didn't continue into the regular season. I'm not saying he should have removed players, but he needs to find a way. He needed to find a way to hold them accountable, and it just kept getting worse, not better. But getting back to just the overall mindset, Saleh told everyone loudly and clearly what his mindset is before the Jets' Week 10 game against the Raiders last year. I think it was he had the sideline interview before the game, and he literally said that it was going to be a race to 20 points. Have you ever heard an NFL head coach saying that it would be a race to 20 points? I mean, it was just an unbelievable statement that just largely got glossed over. But that just tells you his mentality, how keep it close, stay conservative, keep things tight, play good defense, run the ball, score 20 points, beat the opponent. I mean, 20 points is like a cutoff in generally in offensive respectability. Before the season, there was a stat that Rodgers was 81-10 when his defense held the opponent to 20 points or less. There's a reason that that's a benchmark, because 20 points is the bare minimum for respectability generally. You score less than 20 points, okay, you do it once or twice, fine, you play a good defense, whatever, you have an off day. But generally, you need to score more than 20 points to win in the NFL. I don't care if you have a really good defense. And there's only so much a defense can do when the offense is terrible. We saw that last year. The Jets got blown out a bunch of times, even though the defensive DVOA was actually pretty good in a lot of those blowout losses. And it was largely because the defense was put in such a bad position that you can't hold up for so long when your opponent is getting good field position, and when you're just on the field so much. And so, again, this is all solid, and it just starts with a mentality. Robbie Sable keeps pointing out the way the Jets run the football. And yes, the NFL has moved towards a running game in this season. But specifically against the Jets, teams have been shooting gaps with abandon, knowing that the run is coming. And Michael Nania wrote an article today talking about how awful the Jets offense has been out of 12 personnel. Besides the fact that their tight end blocking has been atrocious. I mean, Jeremy Ruckert and Brendan Bates shouldn't be on the team anymore. It's that bad. Conklin has done decently as a receiver. He could have better numbers if Rodgers hadn't missed him a bunch of times. So you live with his blocking. But, I mean, Bates and Ruckert, it's been terrible. But the thing is also, when the Jets are in 12 personnel, especially when the game is close, teams know that the Jets are likely going to run the football, and therefore they shoot gaps. Yes, they could still win if they were actually winning at the point of attack, much harder to run the football. As Robbie was saying, what the Jets need to do, and what they did against the Patriots, is that they came out in spread. They came out up-tempo. They came out quickly. Rodgers generally does better out of the spread. Yes, I know you had cover zero, and you have some issues with that. Perhaps they want to max protect at times. That's another issue. They refuse to leave a tight end to block. But, again, they just need to mix it up more. They need to be willing to take a shot when the defense is daring them to throw the ball deep, or daring them to throw the ball. Again, it's just been ridiculous, and this is all starts with Saleh. I don't care about Nathaniel Hackett. I don't care about Rodgers' preferences. It starts with Saleh's mentality. That is Robert Saleh's mentality, and therefore that's why he had to go. I mean, again, another reason he had to go, he should have gone in the offseason, his coaching hires were atrocious. I mean, okay, it's one thing with Michael LaFleur. I know he was scapegoated. Personally, I was in favor of firing him until I saw that they replaced him with Nathaniel Hackett. But it wasn't just Hackett. Okay, you got Hackett to lure Rodgers. But even if, let's say, they replace Hackett as a play caller now, which we'll get to in a second, who's his replacement going to be? Todd Downing. And Todd Downing's literally, the book on him is that he's a really predictable play caller. So not only did he get a terrible offensive coordinator, but he also hired a quarterbacks coach who might replace the offensive coordinator, who was a terrible play caller. And then not only that, but he hired an offensive line coach who his players hated him so much that they actually went to the media to tell them how much they hated him. And Jets players corroborated that after last season, and they still didn't fire him. And as of now, Keith Carter is still the Jets offensive line coach. Again, this falls on Robert Saleh. His hiring has just been terrible. And especially knowing that he's not an offensive guy, he needed to get a strong offensive cast. I understand that Greg Knapp passed away. Before Zach Wilson's rookie season, they were left blundering. But what about after the 2021 season? They could have hired another offensive assistant. They could have, again, I don't think LaFleur was a bad play caller, especially compared to what we've seen now. But they could have hired someone else to help out LaFleur. They could have put a better offensive infrastructure in place, and they just didn't. And so, again, this all falls under Saleh's purview. And Saleh did basically everything he had to do as a CEO head coach. He did wrong. And so those are my initial thoughts on Saleh's firing. I'm going to get to some of the comments before I continue. I want to talk about who made this decision, what Rodgers had to say, how it went down. Again, what will happen now? We'll talk about that in a minute, but now I just wanted to get to some of the comments. So to go to put this down, Jets GM Woody Johnson finally decided to fire Robert Saleh 2-3 with an overall 20-36 record with the Jets in his fourth year. It was impossible to understand why Saleh got such a long leash when he literally had the second worst win percentage in Jets history, I believe. After I think it was only like Rich Kotite was worse. It was ridiculous. Head coaches so rarely get a fourth year with a team after the first 3 years went like that. And honestly, he should have been fired after 2022 with the issues we were seeing. Again, he got a mulligan last year because of Rodgers. But again, it wasn't about Rodgers. Yes, you could say the starting quarterback got hurt, but ultimately we were seeing the same exact issues in 2023 that we did in 2022. And again, it was the same quarterback. So, for the most part. So the fact that things were worse, to a large extent worse in 2023 than they were in 2022 was Zach Wilson under center. That, again, reflects to a certain extent on the offensive coordinator, but it reflects on the head coach. And just, again, the fact that Saleh even got a fourth year was really dumb. In 6 seasons with the Jets, Rex Ryan went 46-50 as head coach with a 4-2 playoff record. Rex led the Jets to an AFC championship game back-to-back years in 2009 and 2010. Ever since that coaching, Rex was also falling apart by the end of his tenure with the Jets, although you could blame player personnel for a part of it. I never really particularly loved Rex as a head coach. I think he's a good defensive coordinator. But ultimately, he was one of the Jets' most successful head coaches. Hitchhiker's Pie, thanks for joining. And as I said before, 20-36, 357 win percentage, 181st out of 201 head coaches all time, minimum 50 games. Think about that. That's an incredible stat. That the fact that he even got to, because he was already 20-31 before, or sorry, he was already let's go back to, he was already 18-33 before the season. So let's see, 18 plus 33. So he was already had a 353 win percentage before the season. So it was already 181st out of 201 head coaches all time. And he still got a fourth year. It was insane. It's terrible. At least Woody salvaged what he can now. But the fact that Saleh even got a fourth year was absolutely crazy. Harlan, we knew Saleh wasn't a good head coach. I think we knew this after year one. So, again, it's just ridiculous. Coach hired Gase also. Again, we just have a really, really bad track record of hire head coaches. The difference is, I think everyone knew that Gase was a bad hire when they hired him. Kotite was before my time, so I'm not sure. But Gase, I remember hearing that the Jets hired him, and I was like, you fired Todd Bowles and you hired that? Again, but when Saleh signed, you remember when people were going crazy because Saleh was going to leave the building, and people were ecstatic when they hired him. And this just goes to show you that as fans, we don't really know outside the building what a head coach is going to be like until they actually coach. Because especially guys who are coordinators, because again, a coordinator is focused on his side of the ball. He is not meant to, especially as a CEO and things like that. So we just don't know. Okay, Pete Carroll had a losing record with the Jets, got fired, went to New England, did okay, got fired by New England, then went to USC, did well, and then got hired by Seattle. Look, there are coaches who don't succeed in their first spot and then succeed elsewhere. Bill Belichick, I mean, he was a head coach in Cleveland, got fired. Things happen. And Belichick, you could have thought at that point that he's just a great defensive coordinator because he was with the Giants, he was with the Jets. He had a very long track record of success as a defensive coordinator. And so you could have thought that, but ultimately he turned into a great coach with New England. I know that Pete Carroll, again, before my time, but my grandfather, who was the one who made me a Jets fan, he always said that it was a huge mistake for the Jets to fire Pete Carroll. Because if I recall correctly, the team wasn't terrible and they fired him after 1 year. And so that was, again, I'm not saying, again, could Saleh go elsewhere and succeed? Conceivably. I don't think so with his mindset. I really don't. But again, I was wrong about Geno Smith. I look like maybe I was wrong about Sam Darnold. We'll see, because he looked like Sam Darnold looked old against the Jets. But again, the Jets have a good defense. And so, we'll see what happens there. But I've been wrong about many things before. So I can't say certainly that Saleh will not be a good head coach elsewhere. But I think it's a little bit, there's something called the Peter Principle, which basically says that people always end up one level above where they're actually competent. So you keep getting promoted and promoted. Eventually, a promotion goes above where you're actually competent, but you always end up there because you succeeded at the previous level, so you get promoted. And so that applies to a lot of NFL coordinators. Wade Phillips was a classic example. Good defensive coordinator kept getting hired as a head coach, kept failing. So there are some guys who are just meant to be coordinators and not coaches, not head coaches. And then there are guys who, look, I mean, Dan Quinn looks like he's doing such a good job so far in Washington. Did a good job in Atlanta for a period of time. Was good as Dallas's defensive coordinator. So, again, it's early with Washington. Things could fall apart. But look, guys do go other places, do have periods of success, then they fall off, and then they succeed elsewhere. But ultimately, this was the right move for the Jets, regardless of what ends up happening for the rest of Saleh's career. And I'm sure Saleh will get a defensive coordinator position next year. There's no reason for him not to. Frankly, I just hope it's on the Jets division. Harlan, thank you. You said subscribe, even hit the like button. Guys, yeah, if you hit the like button, I appreciate it for reach. So I don't think firing him after 5 games was the most prudent move they could have made. I mean, look, do I think they should have fired him now as opposed to before the season? No. I think they should have fired him after last season. But ultimately, I think the Jets season is really at a pivotal turning point, and just Saleh cannot be trusted to continue with this team. It's not like they're bringing an outside head coach. Ulbrich knows the Jets. He's the defensive coordinator, so that side of the ball shouldn't suffer too much. Even if he hands over play calling duties, Tony Oden is the most likely candidate. Oden has done a phenomenal job with the Jets cornerbacks. Beyond Sauce and DJ Reed, I mean, some of the stuff he's done with Eccles, with Bryce Hall in 2021, Michael Carter II. I mean, Oden is really good. So I'm not too concerned about their defense. And I think Ulbrich as a leader just has an opportunity to prove himself more. Look, I've liked Ulbrich's voice ever since I started hearing it more. You've seen that clip from probably seen that clip from the Senior Bowl about how he motivates his men. Look, not that this is everything, but just the words that he uses and the way he fires his guys up seems to be better than Saleh. He seems to have more energy than Saleh. And he also, even though obviously Saleh was known for his energy on the sideline, so who knows? But Ulbrich, again, he's beloved in the locker room. He's a very steady, stable kind of guy. I think he deserved an opportunity. Frankly, if they had fired Saleh, last year I would have considered promoting Ulbrich, despite the fact that the problems were on offense. And so I think he deserves an opportunity. I get that it looks bad. I get that it causes chaos, but I think, look, we've seen other teams let promising seasons or seasons where they were all in go off the rails because of coaching issues. And so I'm all for the move. That's my personal. Yeah, I mean, look, Jets over the years have hired some bad people to be a head coach. Absolutely. Can I talk about Keith Carter? I did a little bit. Keith Carter, I mean, at this point, look, last year you could say that it was the talent on the offensive line. They had a dearth of talent on the offensive line, especially once Elijah Vera Tucker went out for the season. But at this point, they have 5 players who, at the bare minimum, were average players. Maybe you want to say John Simpson was a bit below average, but they had 5 players across the offensive line who had at least some track record of being decent. And some of them have a track record of being a lot better than that. especially as run blockers. And all of a sudden, this team cannot run block to save their lives. It is worse than last season. The way that they're letting guys just come in free. Last year, it looked like a talent issue. Guys were just missing their blocks. This year, it's a combination of both. It's a talent issue, but it's also just, guys running free. That isn't a schematic issue. It's a communication issue. And that falls on the offensive line coach. I don't know. Like, at this point, you have to think, Benton, the guy they had a couple years ago, you don't think he could do a better job with the talent that they have on this roster? It's completely untenable. And the fact that Keith Carter still has a job, he has to thank, I don't know who for that, but maybe Saleh. But Ulbrich's first move really should be Keith Carter. It was ridiculous. Should have done it last year. The conservative, exactly, 1980s coaching style. That's exactly what it is. It doesn't work. I know he likes the Shanahan offense, but Shanahan's offense isn't just let's run the football. He mixes it up. He runs creative running styles. He has really good passing system that sets up the run. It's not. It's just not like it was completely untenable. I agree. You can't exactly. This is what Woody Johnson said. This is what Rodgers said. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. As Rodgers said today, definition of insanity. If Ulbrich makes the right adjustments on offense, the Jets can defeat the Bills. Look, even if they don't make adjustments, conceivably they can beat the Bills. Bills haven't looked good the last couple of games. They're missing a lot of offensive skill position talent. I know James Cook is very good. You can see it in Josh Allen. He doesn't have a lot of weapons to throw to. He was very reliant on Stephon Diggs. I'm not saying Allen is an elite quarterback. He is. But again, you can't give a quarterback where Khalil Shakir is your number one receiver and Dalton Kincaid and expect the offense to be as smooth as you wanted it to be. And so, look, conceivably could the Jets beat the Bills even if they don't adjust on offense? Look, they almost beat the Vikings. They almost beat Denver. It could happen. But again, if you don't make those adjustments, more often than not, you're going to end up on the wrong end of a close score because most of football falls within one score, and it's just the teams that make the mistakes and don't adjust and don't play according to today's NFL that tend to lose. I wanted to go back now. I know I'm still on the comments. I'll try to get back to them as soon as possible. Verge, I'll get to your comment and we'll get to some of the other ones, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the narrative surrounding the firing, about who caused it. And so obviously the minute Saleh was fired, the first thought is going to be this is Rodgers' decision because the Jets gave Rodgers free reign. There's been tons of talk about the relationship between Rodgers and Saleh. I thought some of it was overblown until last week. I have to say, I really thought it was overblown until last week, until after the Denver game. I thought that the stuff with New England was ridiculous. I really thought that it was just an awkward interaction where one guy expected a hug, the other guy expected a push because Saleh does it a lot. And, and I thought it was blown out of proportion, although maybe it wasn't at this point, considering everything we've seen. I thought the offseason stuff was blown out of proportion. I thought a lot of it was complete nonsense, media trumping up. But what was not blown out of proportion at all was what happened after the Denver game. They asked Saleh about the cadence of the 5 full starts, and he says maybe we should use it less. Then they asked Rodgers about it, and Rodgers says, well, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to hold people accountable. Rodgers was 100% in the right over there. He needed the cadence in that game. He needs it in games with guys who are with teams that aggressively blitz. And instead, the Jets just kept jumping off. At some point, you need to hold guys accountable for it. You need to find a way to make it stop. And just didn't stop. And then making excuses for it, saying, well, we shouldn't use something. A Hall of Fame quarterback has done all throughout his career and has had more success than any other quarterback in NFL history on free plays. 18 touchdown passes, most in NFL history on free plays. And they don't even, it's just like, okay, let's not use it anymore. That was ridiculous, and that showed a fracture in the relationship, in my opinion. And I heard Joe Beningo say, I think it was it Joe Beningo? I heard someone say that they were just surprised it didn't happen last week after the Denver game, after that comment, that issue. And so that was definitely there. I did think that Rodgers probably had something to do with it. I particularly thought so when we heard afterward that Saleh had literally just made the decision to demote Nathaniel Hackett from play caller and replace him with Todd Downing, and then he gets fired. So it makes it sound like it was definitely Rodgers' decision. Woody Johnson insists it was his own decision. He consulted with Joe Douglas, but it was ultimately his own decision. I don't know if it's actually the best for the Jets if Woody made the decision himself, because Woody tends to be impulsive and doesn't know what's what's best for the football team. I'm not saying he was wrong. Again, I think he was right. But I just think ideally for the Jets, it would have been Joe Douglas's decision, because ultimately Saleh reports to Douglas, and Douglas built this team and knows that it has more talent than it's playing to. And therefore, if Douglas was the one who went to Johnson and said, I think we should make a change, I think that would probably be the best just in terms of organizational structure and what this means for the team. But ultimately, I don't believe for a second that Rodgers didn't know about it before. He claims he did. He didn't. He said on McAfee today, he said he resents the accusations that he had Saleh fired and everything like that because they're patently false. That's exactly what he said. He also said, I love it. I find it funny how people think I have so much power because I don't. I mean, Rodgers, you have power to bring in whoever you wanted, no matter how bad they were last year. So why wouldn't people think that you have this power too? They've given you free reign on everything. The only reason they didn't fire Nathaniel Hackett is because he's your buddy. And so, again, people thinking that is 100% legitimate. In terms of whether Rodgers initiated it, I doubt it. I just don't think he would have done that. Maybe he did. Maybe it was that far. I don't think he actively initiated it, but I'd be very shocked if he didn't have any input or at least know what was coming, regardless of what he and Woody Johnson say. Now, one thing that was very interesting that Rodgers said, because everyone wanted to know, what does this change for the offense? One very interesting thing Rodgers just said on McAfee, he went on 12:15 with McAfee. And one thing he said is that something has to change, and I spoke to Ulbrich, and I'm on board with whatever changes he wants to make. It definitely, and especially he said that in a response to a question about his relationship with Hackett, that definitely sounds like, especially since Ulbrich already seemed to kind of intimate it by saying, we'll take a we'll take a hard look at the offense, and everything is on the table when asked about the play caller. And so it does seem like the Jets are preparing to demote Nathaniel Hackett relieve him of his play calling duties and make Todd Downing take over. Now, I don't know if it's going to accomplish anything. Todd Downing, again, as I said, he's known for predictability. As my colleague Michael Nania just said, literally Todd Downing is like the backup quarterback everyone wants to see. He might, might bring a spark for a game or two, but ultimately he's a backup quarterback for a reason. There's a reason that he hasn't continued his play caller. Derek Carr had one of the worst years, if not the worst year of his career, when Downing was his play caller in 2017. The Titans' offense was 20th and 21st in DVOA in 2021. I think it was 21 and 22. Those were the seasons. He's not a good coach. I was very upset when they hired him to begin with because they had a lot of other good options. Again, even hiring as a quarterback's coach, hiring someone from a good tree was a preferable option, especially with a veteran quarterback to hiring Todd Downing. And so, look, now that he's going to be calling plays, if he does call plays, I don't think it's going to be just suddenly everything's going to be hunky-dory. But I do think that the change is necessary. Regardless, you have to change something because Hackett is about as bad as it gets. Just as one example, and I don't know if this will change with Downing. This might be a Rodgers thing. But I'm in the middle of looking at now about how the Jets use Garrett Wilson. And basically one of the reasons that he just hasn't been the same as he was a rookie. He's not as dynamic. Even last year wasn't as dynamic. It wasn't just the quarterback because, again, his quarterbacks in 2022 weren't much better. It's also, remember, his first great game was with Joe Flacco quarterback. And I know Flacco looks good now and blah, 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 blah. Flacco did not look good with the Jets, okay, in 2022. For the most part, he looked terrible. He was probably the biggest reason they lost to the Bills. In the second game, he was not a good quarterback. There's a reason they went back to Zach Wilson rather than putting Flacco in when Mike White got hurt. And so, again, they're just misusing Garrett Wilson. I'll write more about it in an article in the middle of it now. You can check it out when it posts. Probably, I imagine, post tomorrow. But they're completely misusing Garrett Wilson, and they need to change that. Now, if they acquire Devontae Adams, is that more likely to happen? It probably is because they'll use Adams on the routes that Rodgers prefers, and then they can get Garrett open more in the route tree that he's better at. But again, just misusing Garrett Wilson is a big issue. Now, a few other, I guess I'll get to some more comments now because I could get more into a few other things I wanted to talk about soon. So, Verge, you said you disagree on Douglas, best roster we've seen in decades, and he isn't perfect, but he's good in my opinion. And so, I think the thing is with sorry, I just lost my spot in the comments. So if I miss you, if you made a comment that I miss you, it's because I lost my spot. And so, look, I still disagree on Douglas. Best roster we've seen in decades. He isn't perfect, but he's good, in my opinion. Okay, so this is my comment on that. First of all, yes, it's the best roster we've seen in decades. Since when does any general manager get 4 off seasons, especially with a record like that, to build a roster? I mean, you better hope that you've built a great roster in 5 off seasons or 4 or 5 off seasons. General managers usually don't get that. That's why it's like best roster he's built. He shouldn't have had the opportunity to build it. Yes, I did write an article this offseason that he should be granted a reprieve because I thought he did a good job this offseason. Ultimately, I had plenty of people disagree with me and say it's his total body of work and not just what he did this offseason. But again, Douglas is better than Saleh. I think that was always the case. But at least in terms of just understanding team building and understanding what needs to be done to win in the NFL. But I still was not a huge Douglas fan, but I'm willing to give him a leash. Certainly, I don't think he should be fired before the end of the year. We'll see what happens. I think he's botched the Hassan Reddick situation. I think he botched the JFM trade big time. I'm not going to give him as much flack for letting Huff go, but I really think he did some bad things also. I thought signing Kimmel over Quentin Jefferson was a major mistake. But again, we'll see about Douglas. Let's see. Okay, we're here. I found it. Okay, what are your thoughts on Sauce calling you out? Okay, so a few things. I should start by saying, and I know most people aren't going to see this, but I made a big mistake in my article, and I wanted to clarify. I made just a mistake of language because I didn't mean that the Jets should not play Breece Hall. I did not mean that they should bench him in that sense. I made a mistake. I don't know why exactly I used that language because benching generally implies putting a guy on the bench and not playing him. What I actually meant is that Braylon Allen should be the clear starter and Breece's role should be diminished further. That's really what I meant. I thought that's really what I meant to say, and I don't know if Sauce would have called me out the way he did if I had written that. So I do think I brought that on myself to an extent. As far as Sauce calling me out, I mean, he has every right to do it. I wrote an article about it afterwards saying that he has to defend his teammate. That's what he's supposed to do. I think maybe going on X and posting about it isn't the best idea. But, I mean, again, he's supposed to an extent. I would say, if Sauce is reading my stuff or even reading the headlines of my stuff, I'm probably on the right track. But anyways, I stand by the idea, though. And again, Sauce just, again, what I wrote about, if you read the headline, what it said is these poor effort plays from Breece Hall call for benching. It wasn't even about how poorly he's playing. And he's playing poorly, and Braylon Allen's playing a lot better. And for that reason alone, Allen has earned more carries. But more importantly, if you saw the 2 plays that I was talking about against Minnesota, I think any head coach with any sort of guts would have put Breece on the bench, at least for some plays during that game, because it was ridiculous. I mean, he just completely, decided not to chip for Tyron Smith. Totally, just, decided not to chip. Just, stood there, basically, before going on his run. Didn't even try. On the pick 6, Van Ginkel should have been tackled at the 20-yard line. Breece was just, loafing over there. Then he realized, I better get on my horses. But then even when he got there, there was very, very, very little space to the sideline. He took on Harrison's fist block half-heartedly. Didn't even try to push him into the sideline or break it or anything. It was like he thought, my teammate will get him. I mean, come on, Breece. For that reason, that's why I called for his benching, regardless of what language I used, and I stand by that. I don't at all think I was wrong to say it. I think the criticism was apt. Again, Sauce had to do what he had to do by defending Breece, and I will not. Frankly, even if he was wrong, I don't really care. I mean, it's his prerogative to say whatever he wants on X. The only reason I even saw it, because if you want to know the truth, I don't check X. I don't have access to it. I have a family member who runs an X account that tweets out some of my stuff, but I don't check it, so I don't see any of the responses, anything like that. You want to respond to something I said, you can email me. Some fans do it occasionally, but I don't see anything on Twitter. And so, what Sauce said or didn't, the only reason I saw it is because someone's posted in our Jets X Factor Slack group. Again, my response basically is Sauce did what he has to do. Commendable that he did it. I stand by my statement. That's basically my response. Harlan, I appreciate it. Saleh didn't do anything. I mean, that's a point I made. It kept getting worse. Curly high. why has Joe Douglas been Invisible Man this week? What's the job description again? It's definitely a very good point, and it would point to the fact that Douglas wasn't really involved in the decision, right? Because if Douglas had been the one to fire Saleh, he'd be the one doing the talking at this point. Yeah, I mean, he's generally not too available. He's also the most bland interview you've ever seen. I mean, Douglas doesn't give you anything. He literally doesn't give you any, like, I watch his press conferences and I'm like, I can't even write an article about this because there's nothing to say. And so I don't think it would change anything. But yeah, it is interesting that he hasn't been in front of the camera. He was demoting Hackett. Rodgers came to Hackett's defense and Woody fired Saleh. I don't know if you would put it in those terms, because Rodgers literally just said today that, I mean, again, maybe he's lying, maybe he's not telling the truth, but he's said some things need to change and he's okay with whatever changes Ulbrich makes. And if we see Downing become the play caller, which seems to be on track anyway, that is a change and ultimately has nothing to do with Rodgers defending Hackett. Hackett's not getting fired. That's not going to happen because of Rodgers, but ultimately he loses his play calling duties. That's at least a step. Receipt boy didn't have a clue. I mean, the receipt thing will follow him forever. Didn't have a clue on the offensive side. It wasn't just that he didn't have a clue. It was his whole mindset. Yeah, race to 20 made you boil over, Ryan. Exactly. Like people forget that, but it was just like, it was such an epitome of who Robert Saleh is as a coach. That, I mean, again, he deserved to be fired after he said that. Last time team with a mean point per game was below 20. Do you mean the last time the mean points per game below 20 in 1993? Exactly. I mean, most points per game are below 20. If you notice the Jets during the Saleh tenure, he was doing the same thing over and over again. He was just expecting it. Exactly. I mean, Woody Johnson said, he's like, we can't do the same thing over and over again. And so, yeah. According to Craig Carton, who claims he spoke to numerous Jets insiders, Saleh told the coaches on the plane ride home from on offense interchanges. Again, obviously, he was just about to demote. Literally, there's one report that said 5 minutes before he was fired, Saleh was planning to relieve Hackett of his play calling duties and make Todd Downing again. So undoubtedly, he knew that changes had to be made. I think the changes just had to be more sweeping than just on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm all for firing Saleh, regardless of what he said. Yes, he realized there were changes, but I think that they had to make this move. Hitchhiker's Pie, again, you clarified. I appreciate it because, again, you need to score over 20 points. 20 points per game is the bare minimum of offense. And the fact that Saleh said it's a race to 20 points was just ridiculous. I think Woody should have given Saleh one game with Downing as a play caller, and if they lost to Buffalo, and fired Saleh. I don't think Woody even wanted to wait that long because, again, it's such an important game that if he thinks Saleh is not the man, he had to fire him. The offense didn't change. You see that play calling 4th and short, and they run from the pistol formation. Again, Saleh didn't call that specific play. But even the fact that they ran into that situation on 4th and 2 after they had just been stuffed on a counter on 3rd and 3 was dumb. But out of the pistol, I mean, Dan Orlovsky was talking about it. He was literally like, what? Allen was like 9 yards behind the line of scrimmage. If he had been close to the line of scrimmage, even with that blocking, he probably gets the first down. We know Braylon Allen. And so, again, that's the offensive play calling, but that's different. I agree, Brees has been disappointed, but does Sauce comment make you second guess the article or double down? As I said, I mean, again, Sauce is free to comment whatever he wants. I'm only responding to it because I actually did respond in an article and then got called out on X for it by but basically, Sauce's comment, as I clarified, I did not mean that Brees should actually be like not dressed for a game. What I meant is that Braylon Allen should be the clear starter and Brees should have his role diminished. And again, my point was more not about his play, but about his running, but about his effort. And I will stand by that anytime I call out a player for him. It has nothing to do with their play. You could say a player deserves a longer leash, because, to figure it out. And again, I was as complimentary to Brees as anyone, and Sauce pointed that out, and he's 100% right. Our site was very into Brees. We said Brees was the Jets' best player. We thought he was going to have close to 2,000 scrimmage yards. I picked him for Jets MVP, Jets Offensive Player of the Year. I picked him. Actually, I think I may have picked him for NFL Offensive Player of the Year. That's how in on Brees I was, and I'm horribly disappointed with how he's playing. I'm also astonished at how bad he's been, even with the offensive line. But ultimately, I called him out primarily for effort, and I will always stand by that, just as Sauce has to defend his teammate. Rodgers ordered the code red. Again, it doesn't appear to be so, even if he was involved in it. Okay, I need to get myself new earphones because these or get my headphones because this is ridiculous. Sorry about that. R&R, New Start, Brickhouse, let's go. Yep, I agree. I mean, yeah, Stanley. Saleh was not a good head coach when it came to game management, preparation, and team discipline. He was a defensive coordinator, never grew into a good head coach. Look, could he grow into a good head coach in a different place? Possibly, if he's given a better infrastructure to start. It could be that coming in the way he did it wasn't a good place to go. Like if he took over a team like the Cowboys next year, it could be things would change. But the things you mentioned, that's exactly it. Those are the things: game management, preparation, team discipline. Those are three things that any head coach has to deal with, and they were all horrible. Saleh didn't know how to fix anything exactly, and he took too long to even try. I mean, there are so many times Jets X Factor was calling, and based on the numbers and the film, we're calling for certain changes, and it takes him. I mean, if he made the change at all, it would take him weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. It was ridiculous. I disagree with Saleh getting the Buffalo game, and I don't understand what point that would have been. 20-36. I mean, look, I agree. I could see the point. I can't say that like I don't understand why people are saying it, but I agree that I don't think Saleh should have gotten the Buffalo game. I was astonished at what he did. I mean, I didn't think he had the guts to do it. I didn't think he would do it. He's never done it before, so I didn't think he would. But I mean, look, I agree with it, and I commend him for doing it. Gase was a bad hire. Peyton Manning, Cole Johnson. Gase had the offense humming in the first 15 plays. I know that's what's something interesting. The Jets started out worse offensively on the scripted plays than they did when Adam Gase was the head coach. I mean, that just tells you something. Yes, Saleh does. I have no problem with firing Saleh. I have a problem with firing Saleh over listening to Rodgers to keep Hackett. The head coach has to have control, not the quarterback. This is a dysfunctional organization. So again, based on what Rodgers said, and again, Rodgers could be lying through his teeth. Wouldn't be the first time. But based on what Rodgers said today, it sounds like he's fine with replacing Hackett as a play caller. And I've even seen some people say that when they reading Rodgers' lips after certain plays, he said, like, why the heck are we running the ball here? And so if he's saying that, and people said you could even see it on Hard Knocks last year. Like all through training camp, he's like, this is a horrible play. Why are we running it? And so at some point, even a guy like Rodgers, as much of a control freak as he is, and yes, I know Rodgers sees everything people said, and I'm sure he's seen me say this before, or he's seen that I've written this before, but as much of a control freak as he is, he also wants to succeed. And at some point when he sees it's not succeeding, he knows that something has to change. As much as he likes Hackett is not going to get fired. Yes, that's a Rodgers thing. But ultimately, if he's not the play caller, that should diminish the level of ineptitude, even if Hackett is still around. Again, he was still the offensive coordinator again under Matt LaFleur, but he wasn't the play caller. It was a mistake to fire Pete Carroll. The Jets fired Bruce Coslet, then named Pete Carroll as head coach. Again, it was before my time, but from what I understood, that was the case. Part of the problem lies with Joe Douglas because the offensive line has never been fixed. JD drafted Becton over Wirfs, traded for Reddick, and diluted defensive line talent. Look, the last 3 years, no one has been more critical of Joe Douglas when it comes to the offensive line than I have. I slammed him over and over again, and I know anyone who reads Jets X Factor knows how critical I have been of Joe Douglas, specifically over the offensive line. You can't say that this season. I'm sorry. I know Tyron is not playing like he normally did, but Tyron was a second-team All-Pro last year. He didn't. If you watch Joe Blowitt's review, he looked as good as he did when he was 25. And so there was no reason to think Tyron would fall off. And frankly, he's not playing terribly. He's just not playing well. Again, he's had some bad plays. Obviously, he's given up some sacks, which is atrocious. He's given up more sacks now than he's given up in a full season since 2017. And so, but again, Simpson. Okay, reputation slightly below average. Film was mostly average. Again, if Simpson is your weakest link in an offensive line, the offensive line should be elite. Joe Tippmann had a very promising rookie year. Showed a lot of potential. AVT, known as a very good run blocker. Had some work to do as a pass blocker, but was still at least average. Right tackle, Morgan Moses. Moses had a great year last year, was great with the Ravens. Mauling run blocker generally, at least an average pass protector. And so, again, you take these 5 pieces, and the fact that the whole is worse than the sum of its parts, that's a coaching issue. That's not a JV issue. Even drafting Olo Fashion. I mean, Fashion looks terrible. Again, he's playing right tackle, not left tackle. He looks terrible through 2 games, even in pass protection. But it wasn't, I can't say it was the wrong move. Again, I don't want to get into a whole Brock Bowers conversation. Again, I maintain it was the right move regardless of what happens with Bowers and what happens with anyone. But I'm not going to kill Douglas over the offensive line this year. I think that it's very clear that he did the best he could with the offensive line. He actually did an amazing job. I mean, being able to trade for Morgan Moses $5.5 million, signing John Simpson for $6.5 million per year, when like guys who are on the same level were getting $17 million per year. Having Jonah Jackson with the Rams. At tackle, Jonah Williams, $15 million. Ridiculous contracts, and he got Moses and Simpson for less combined. He got 2 offensive linemen, and so I mean, yeah, you can't blame Douglas for the offensive line this year. You just can't. In terms of drafting Becton over Wirfs, I agree. I know a lot of people. There are people who say it was a toss-up, and after the rookie year was looking great. I'm sorry, Wirfs was as far as I remember, he was a Pro Bowler after his rookie year, All-Pro after his second year. From what I recall from that draft process, Wirfs was considered a better prospect. He went for the mauler as opposed to more of the safe bet. I know why he did it again. He did it partially because Becton had played left tackle and Wirfs hadn't. And I mean, honestly, Wirfs had played great at left tackle, but he did say that he had to consult a psychiatrist or psychologist over switching. So you could see that there was certainly some anxiety there. And the Jets may have heard it if they talked to him that he didn't want to play left tackle. And so again, I can't totally destroy him for the move. I was very upset when they drafted Becton over Wirfs. So in that sense, it's not Monday morning quarterbacking, but I can understand it. Trading for Reddick and diluted the defensive line talent. So the biggest issue I have, look, letting Huff go, I didn't like. I wanted Huff back. But again, if they had kept John Franklin Myers, gotten Reddick in the building, and gotten him in, properly, this defensive line would be fine. But letting your best edge defender, your best run defender go, and downgrading in your pass rush, objectively speaking, regardless of what Huff has done until now, was not a great idea. And then, obviously, the Reddick situation, ultimately, it's on Douglas, regardless of what happened. I agree about Keith Carter. I think they fired him exact right time. I agree. It's not Saleh's fault that Hall and Allen run game not exist in the last 2 weeks and Moses' injury at right tackle. The run blocking was just as bad before Moses got hurt, even though objectively speaking, Ola is much, much worse as a run blocker than Moses. And it is Saleh's fault that, again, the offensive line is largely Keith Carter's fault, but the mentality is still Saleh's fault. Running into heavy boxes, running into run blitzes. I mean, that is on Saleh. That is not just on Nathaniel Hackett. It's the whole mentality of establishing the run. I don't care. Saleh, yes, maybe Rodgers threw 50 passes the other day, but it was still, even just coming out trying to run the ball and digging themselves into a hole was ridiculous. They needed to be aggressive against Brian Flores. Brian Flores was a boomer bust system. And the Jets should have made it bust, and they didn't. They played right into his hands. Extra day for Ulbrich, and the writing was on the wall. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. Typical Jets, they do the right thing with Saleh, but don't fire him. Needed to go. Keith Carter is the worst offensive line coach in the NFL. Look, I don't disagree. Ultimately, Keith Carter needs to go. I still think it was the right move to fire Saleh regardless. Would it have been better if they fired Carter and Hackett and kept Saleh? Debatable. I don't know. I don't know for sure. I want the Saleh gone, and so I can't say for sure. Perhaps I definitely think you can make an argument, but yeah, I agree. He's terrible. O-line is trash. No running game, no pass protection. What's interesting is as much as Rodgers has gotten hit, he's actually in game over game. He has been hit less than the average quarterback. I didn't check about the last game, but I think next year's stats said 29.8%, which is not terrible. Yes, he gets sacked more than he should because the way they're running their pass protection is ridiculous, not picking up blitzes. But the pass protection has done enough. The Jets would be killing for this kind of pass protection last season. They've done enough, and there have been enough opportunities, and Rodgers has missed them, and the receivers have missed them. Ultimately, yes, the run blocking has been terrible, but I blame Rodgers and the receivers far more than I do the pass blocking for why their offense has struggled the last 2 weeks. Another problem is Rodgers being banged up and unable to move out of the pocket due to playing from behind a lack of running game. I don't even know if it's not being able to move out of the pocket. I think the bigger issue has been it looks like his accuracy might be off because of it. And his accuracy was terrible in the last 2 games. And it's a very, very concerning issue because if he can't hit open receivers, this Jets team is doomed. As the head coach, making adjustments to parts of the team to allow for success is imperative. Saleh was resistant to change and wanted to stay the course, weather the storm. Exactly. I mean, he always wanted to weather the storm, and it just doesn't. You can't do that. At some point, you need to change. whose idea was it to run it back as is? Woody. And so it's kind of Woody had to like paper over his mistake. The Titans celebrated when they fired Carter. Exactly. I mean, it was the most ridiculous hire ever. Rodgers 9 sacks and hit 25 times. We're lucky he's still playing this season. 9 sacks in 5 games is not exactly like a horrible number. You get sacked 2 times per season, 34 sacks in the season. Let me just check. I'm curious. How many sacks? How many? I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe 34 sacks is a lot. He also saw Rodgers walked into some of those sacks. But let me see how many quarterbacks. Let's see, 200. What was the sacks? Yeah, Sam Howell was sacked 65 times last year. Being sacked 34 times would have been the 13th highest in the NFL. Again, that's more than average, but it's not terrible. It's not atrocious. The 25 hits is definitely an issue. How often he's been hit as opposed to just pressure. But I think the pass blocking is not as bad as it's been. It has not been the biggest issue. Just look, I wrote articles the last 2 weeks showing how many passes Rodgers flat out missed. Now there was some also. Lazard doesn't drop that ball in the end zone. We're probably talking about a win. Probably just based on everything you saw. They didn't get called for 5 defensive pass interference calls, ridiculous defensive pass interference and holding calls. I mean, almost all of those were terrible. They probably win. Frankly, if Stephon Gilmore gets called for defensive pass interference on the final interception, they might have won. And so you can always blame X, Y, and Z. I do think Rodgers' accuracy is a much bigger issue than people have been talking about. Is Moses back on Monday? I have no idea. I'm going to guess he misses another game, but I don't know. Was Morgan Moses the voice of the offensive line? Who knows? I mean, he certainly didn't play well in week 1. Have you heard any of the reports? Saleh literally got fired because he was making a change. He wanted to take play. Look, you can read it that way. It doesn't sound like that was the case. Maybe Rodgers was in on it, but it does sound like ultimately Woody decided something had to change. I don't think that was why. Yes, he should have fired him on Monday instead of Tuesday, and that certainly lends to the idea that he was fired because he was going to make the change. I don't think that's the case. Maybe the Jets should have signed Bakhtiari as a swing tackle instead of. I mean, Bakhtiari has been on the couch and he's barely been able to stay healthy for 1 game in the last 3 years. Personally, I was pro that. I didn't have a problem with it, but I don't think it was a bad move, regardless of what is actually happening. Now let's see. Carter and Saleh this was one of the problems. This is a broader problem in the NFL, the nepotism issue where people hire their buddies as opposed to hiring the best guy for the job. General managers do it all the time where they bring over their buddies too, even if the guy stunk. That kind of happened with Kinlaw to an extent. Happened with Solomon Thomas, although Thomas is a backup, so it was fine. I covered the Giants last year. He brought in Joe Shane brought in Boogie Basham. It was ridiculous. There were some other moves. The nepotism, Saleh was a king of it, but that was and Carter was certainly an issue down in all these guys he brought in. He couldn't get away from the guys that he had coached with before, as opposed to guys who might be best for the job. Saleh lost winnable games this year and last. No excuse why he should have stayed. Exactly. Andrew, thank you. I appreciate it. I've never seen a receiver with worse hands than Lazard. Should they keep his role to a minimum? They should, but they won't with Rodgers. And it's a big issue because Rodgers is stubborn, and that is a fundamental issue with this offense. It's not just Hackett. Rodgers needs to grow up and realize that just because he likes someone doesn't mean they're a good player. Look, Lazard has made some good plays for them this year, but ultimately he can't do. He had 3 horrible drops, and particularly 2 of them. Perfect throws from Rodgers. He just drops them. They needed those plays, and he has more drops than last year, and his drop percent he's dropping more than 1 out of every 5 of his passes of his targets. It's insane. Saleh was fired because he lost the trust and faith of the players. They saw him as blowing smoke. That definitely could be the case. It sounds like it. It sounds like people. What Quincy Williams said was a direct shot at Saleh. About how he says people have to start taking accountability. They don't want to hear the same thing all over again. That was a shot at Saleh, and so it could have been a broader, representation of what the players felt like. So he should have done it when they were 2-2. I can't say so because they were coming off a. No, you were saying after the Bronco game. Look, conceivably you could say that it was so bad, and it was a reflection of Saleh. You could say that he gave him one more game. I don't know what he thought of doing it after Denver. I don't know if the whole London and Bassett thing is real. I doubt it. But especially since he probably would have done it on Monday if that was the reason he fired Saleh. But I mean, look, if he had done it after the Denver game, I would have been stunned. Like now, I was very surprised he did it. I would have been absolutely stunned. It wasn't really on my mind that they were going to do it after the Denver game. But can I say he should have done it? I don't know. Would it have been better if they did it? Possibly. Calling the offense versus calling plays. Look, Matt LaFleur was the play caller in Green Bay. Hackett was the offensive coordinator. They still had success. And so it kind of tells you that the play caller has a big say. It's not just who's designing the offense. Fasher isn't ready to start, in my opinion. He's a good project, though. I mean, he's looked bad. He's definitely looked bad. It could be partially right tackle. Never going to move him to left tackle, though, if Tyron's healthy. He definitely doesn't look ready, which is disappointing. But I still think that you have to do it. You have to start him. You start Carter Warren. Listen to Baltimore's insight on how we would make offensive changes immediately. Put the O-line in pads in practice and work on the point of attack on zone blocking over and over. It's so smart. Yeah, no, he's not wrong. I mean, Robbie Saber responded to him and said that the bigger issue is running into stacked boxes. I mean, when you have 8-on-7 or you have 7-on-6, you're probably not going to win, especially if it's a linebacker shooting the gap unblocked. Now, Braylon seems to have had a better chance of defeating that first unblocked guy than Brees, which might be one reason to play him. But, yeah, I mean, look, Carter needs to go. Apparently, Saleh wasn't involved here at all. In terms of being fired, yeah, probably not. Has anyone seen Joe Douglas? No. The only thing we need to change is the only thing we can. If we fire Hackett, Rodgers will take the ball and go home. Look, I don't know what to say about that anymore. Hopefully they'll place him as a play caller. I don't know if it'll change anything. I don't know what to say. It could be this offense is just doomed, but they have to try something. I don't think Rodgers went to Woody and said, fire Saleh. Woody discussed it with falling behind 17-0 in London against the Vikings and probably made the decision then. Look, if he made the decision then, he probably would have fired him on Monday morning. So you have to wonder. I don't think Rodgers went to Woody and said, fire Saleh, but I think he had something to do with it. I think Woody said during that 5 minutes conversation on Monday night, hey, I'm going to make a change at the top. Is that going to be a problem? And Rodgers said, no. Yeah, that makes sense. There's another potential answer here. Saleh could well have been demoting Hackett to cover for issues he had with the team. Yeah, I definitely could be. Rodgers is an adult and has had more than Hackett as an offensive coordinator, so whatever happens, he will at least play out the year. I mean, he will, but it's not going to happen. Again, they're not going to fire Hackett. Saleh was a scapegoat. The defense was not the problem. It was a play calling and Rodgers. I'm sorry. If Saleh was only responsible for the defense, he would be the defensive coordinator, not the head coach. He's a head coach. He's supposed to be a CEO. He's the one who lays out the mindset, even if he's not calling the individual plays. He can go to the offense and say, stop running running out of 12 personnel. He can go to the offense and say, start running Garrett Wilson on crossers and digs instead of go routes. He can go to the offense and say, use Braylon Allen more and Brees less. He can go to the offense and talk about some of these issues. He can go to the offense and say, let's max protect when they're running cover zero. He can go to the offense and say that we need to have a better answer to cover zero than running a slant that Brian Flores can drop a guy straight into the window for a pick six. These are things that the head coach can say that are schematic issues, regardless of who's calling the plays. And he just didn't do it. Saleh was the problem. Bad head coach. A good head coach with a bad team is 500. Saleh was 20-36 the head coach. I don't know about that. A good head coach with a really bad team could still be bad. But 20-36 was insane. How typical would that be if Rodgers? We lose 3 games because the offense, instead of looking in the mirror, be like, fire Saleh. I mean, look, Rodgers just said today, he said one thing that occurred to him right when Saleh was fired was basically, if I had played better on Sunday, this wouldn't have happened. I think he's willing to take his own accountability. I don't think he's saying that I really, really don't think that he said fire Saleh because of how the offense played alone. I think he probably had something to do about it, or at least he had advanced knowledge. But I don't think that it was merely like, oh, I played terribly, but instead I'm just going to blame Saleh. Especially based on what he said. Again, he could be maybe he's just totally lying. But it didn't sound like that for me. He knows he didn't play. He knows he missed a ton of opportunities. Nothing will improve without the run blocking improving. Rodgers can't throw the ball 50 times a game. But again, the run blocking will inevitably improve if they can throw better. You can pass to set up the run. If you force teams into a softer look, and they're not shooting gaps all the time, eventually you will have more success. If you put in Braylon Allen instead of Brees, it could be you'll be able to compensate a little bit more for bad blocking. No, I will never be an offense. Not only, obviously, you're joking, but the point is, I'm not saying anything novel over here. I'm not like an X's and O's offensive genius or anything like that. I know what I know offensively, and I know what I don't know. And one thing I don't know is how to, again, Joe Bluto pointed out, Robbie Sidwell pointed out, play design and things like this. That's not my forte. But what I do know is some of the basic, most obvious things. And you look at the numbers again, you look at the film, these are just fundamental things that just they kept doing the same thing all over again. It was ridiculous. First and last game of Saleh's career, our losses to Sam Darnold. Never should have drafted Wilson. I mean, if you're saying that Sam Darnold won that game on Sunday, you didn't watch the game. Sam Darnold played hard. The Jets defense made him look like the Sam Darnold developed. It had nothing to do with Sam Darnold at all. And in fact, if not for a bunch of defensive pass interference calls, it would have been even worse because they wouldn't have scored that touchdown offensively. They literally would have had 3 field goals and a pick six. And so I'm sorry. I mean, look, and I'm one, by the way, who didn't think that they should have drafted Wilson. I was into keeping Darnold. I was one of the few who felt that way. Even though I understood why they did it, I preferred to keep Darnold and build a team, not because I thought Darnold was good, but because I thought no quarterback would succeed with the kind of infrastructure that the Jets had. And I still think I might have been right about that regardless. But, yeah, I don't give any credit to Darnold for Sunday's win. Saleh was not a scapegoat. He had no discipline on the team. The Jets are the top of the league in penalties. If you give up 100 or more yards in penalties, you will not win many games. Exactly. Great. Todd Downing stinks too. Yes, he does, and you should probably spread the memo before people get too excited about Todd Downing. The real head coach, Aaron. Yes and no. Obviously has a lot of power, but ultimately he's listening to the play calls, I think, especially based on certain things he's kind of said. I think he is taking a play call because you could see, like he's saying, like, why the heck are we running this play? And that wouldn't be the case if he was calling his own offense. He'll finish out the year with a whiny, pouty look on his face, playing like garbage, and then say it's because we're a dysfunctional organization. Certainly could be the case. Flacco played behind a terrible offensive line and is a statue. Flacco plays well behind a good offensive line. Conceivably. Cleveland's offensive line wasn't very good last year. Definitely with the Colts, they have a good offensive line, and that would certainly explain it. But Flacco certainly wouldn't have played better with the Jets last year. I'm not sure what they're responding to. It is telling QBs leave, the Jets get better, at least marginally better. I mean, it is, and but it starts with mindset. I mean, Robbie Saleh has been saying Darnold is the classic example and the classic reason that shows you that coaching matters. I mean, Geno Smith too. A lot of quarterbacks, coaching matters. The week of a division game, for first place in the division, they fired the head coach. What the heck? Look, I already talked about my thoughts on the matter. I think it was precisely because of the stakes of this game that they fired Saleh. If they were playing an easier opponent or they were playing a game that mattered less, let's say we're 3-2 and playing this game now. If they were 3-2, they probably wouldn't have fired him to begin with. But I'm saying, or let's say this game they were 3-3 and they were going into this kind of game, but they were coming off the same back-to-back losses. I think that it was exactly for that reason that they fired Saleh, because they can't afford to go into another game with Robert Saleh as their head coach. There might still be some additional changes, yes, but Ulbrich said he doesn't anticipate changing the staff at all, which is not a good thing. Time to run through a brick wall, yeah. Douglas isn't the problem, could do better, but he's brought in plenty of good talent from where we were. Yes, but I still think ultimately at some point you have to say enough is enough if the team is not winning. GM doesn't get another year if his team has never gone over 500 in 5 seasons. I agree, although I missed JFM as well. No, I thought the JFM trade was terrible. They should have kept him. It was a really, really bad move. Let's see. The fan base is funny. You either think nothing will change or you think Ulbrich is Vince Lombardi. I think both could be true, that Ulbrich is a better head coach and things don't change enough. I like Ulbrich. I think he will be a positive change, but I can't guarantee it. Yeah, I mean, the polarization is definitely interesting. If Rodgers is still running that ancient scheme and any other change we make is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, I mean, it's definitely a good metaphor, good simile. But it's or metaphor, but it's yeah. I mean, it's definitely on Rodgers. Someone needs to go to Rodgers and say we need to use motion more, not just when we run the football. Stop just motioning a tight end into as the H back or as a fullback. That's not called motion. And so, yeah, that is definitely the case. Rivka versus Sauce beef. I mean, frankly, if I had credentials with the Jets and I got to ask Sauce a question, I wouldn't be nervous. I don't think it was a personal thing. Frankly, I don't think Sauce looked at the name of the person writing it. He may have seen the website, but it was tweeted out by Jets X Factor, not by me. And so I suspect that he just saw the title. He knows that Jets X Factor writes. Definitely not beef. I don't have any feelings towards Sauce one way or another, other than I wish he would tackle. Let's see. Who do you think the Jets head coach will be next season? If I had to bet, I would say Ulbrich. Maybe that's an overly optimistic take, but that's still the one I'm going to go with. I like him. Been busy today. Fired Keith Carter today. I mean, let me check. People posted stuff. I don't think so. Let's see. No, it doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like they fired Keith. Keep talking for the young ones need to hear it. Which thing? The media is funny. There's never been an interim head coach that took the team to the playoffs. Has there ever been an interim head coach that was one game out of first place? Exactly. It's like the stupidest thing you ever heard. Also, sorry, Rich Bisaccia was an interim head coach. John Gruden resigned, but he was forced out. And so, again, if Antonio Pierce did well last year, if the Raiders hadn't been in such a big hole, they might have made the playoffs. And so it's a ridiculous point. You don't usually fire a head coach when you're 2-3. If the Jets don't make the playoffs this year, JJ will be gone. Probably the case. Rodgers made the call. Saleh was fired. Confidence is restored. Jets stock price goes up again. I don't think it's that simple, but I could see why you would see it that way. Saleh was just digging his grave deeper every week, 100%. Sure, that makes sense. Rodgers throwing the ball over 50 times, getting hurt, and playing from behind meant Jets needed to make changes on offense. I'm not sure what your point is exactly. The problem with Saleh is that he's too stubborn to make changes unless he was literally forced to. That is not good for a head coach. 100%. I mean, he was completely inflexible. Downing is a poor man's Hackett. Exactly. I mean, that's the best way to say it. Hopefully he'll be better, but that's not his track record over 3 years. Saleh should have been fired at the end of 2022. I mean, look, I think you could definitely make that case. I think I did, as a matter of fact. I think I actually called for Saleh to be fired at the end of 2022. Saleh could have changed that play. Which one? The 4th and 2 running play. Saleh just wasn't proactive at all. Exactly. The main problem was expecting Rodgers to come in and fix everything on offense by himself. I mean, they brought in plenty of offensive talent that should be gelling better than it is. It's 5 games already. But certainly the coaching staff, yes. And with his cronies, yeah, I agree. What do you think is going on with the Davante Adams trade? I think the Raiders still want a second-round pick. No one's giving them a second-round pick, so now they're holding out hope that. And the other thing is because Davante's injured, it could be that no team is willing to trade for him until he's healthy. But I think the key thing is they want a second-round pick, and they don't want to pick up any of his salary, and they want another pick, and no one's willing to give him that. So the teams are waiting for his price to come down. But yeah, they just need Adams sooner rather than later. If Brian Daboll was the coach, he would have made the change and been involved in the game. Saleh stood on the sideline and did nothing. I mean, Daboll is an offensive coach, and people have had plenty of issues with his play calling this year too. Not that I followed recently, but from what I saw after the Cowboys loss. But yeah, Daboll is definitely more proactive than Saleh. Brees is very disappointing. Had trouble running the ball, catching the ball, and he can't block. I mean, the blocking, there's just no excuse for it. The guy, again, if he sticks his head down there, he does enough to block. I mean, again, you don't expect a running back to hold up for 5 seconds on a guy running 30 miles per hour or whatever, running like whatever it is, like running straight at his chest. But you expect him to be able to hold up enough for the quarterback to release the ball, and Brees is not even trying. That's a bigger issue. Catching the ball, I don't know if he's had such an issue catching the ball. A couple, yeah, he had a drop or two, but most of them were like really bad throws to the flat. People allowing Rodgers to live in their heads rent-free. Why do you think he's living in their heads rent-free? He's the Jets quarterback. Stanley Mann, Saleh never tried to coach up the players on the bench, didn't do anything about the penalties. I mean, did you ever go see him talk to a player? Ever? He just sat there with that same, stoic expression on his face, and then he would run and dap up players who got touchdowns. That's it. Rodgers knows his boy sucks. I mean, hopefully he does by now. They think that because they're having fun in practice, that means they're going to play well on Sunday. You have to have attention to detail and get your execution perfect. I mean, the attention to detail is deplorable. It's totally atrocious. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Something had to change. Who's going to be the next head coach, offensive coordinator? And for young words, Belichick was already our co-head coach with Parcells. Kraft asked about him. They didn't want him to let go, so Parcells stepped down so he would be a head coach. No, Belichick was not the co-head coach. Belichick was an assistant head coach, which teams have sometimes, which is a little higher than a coordinator, but he was not the head coach. What was in Belichick's contract was that he would take over as the head coach. Belichick, so then Parcells stepped down knowing that Belichick was going to take over. The problem is, according to what I understand, is that Belichick had a good relationship with Leon Hess. When Hess passed away and this team was being sold, he didn't know anything about the other two owners, and so he didn't want to go there. He went to Robert Kraft instead, and the rest is history. The question about why he hates the Jets so much is a different story. Saleh should have been fired before last season. I mean, again, we just said it, and I think I even called for it. It got him mad, so he resigned and went to the Patriots. He will not ever be a Jets head coach. No, he will not ever be a Jets head coach. That Saleh should have been fired after the 30-0 Miami loss. I mean, look, if you wanted to give him to the end of last season because the season was lost at that point anyway, fine. But he should have definitely been fired. Keith Carter ruins good players' asses more. I mean, 100%. He's ruining good players right now. When Simpson misses a good player, do you think a block? Do you think he yells out? Saleh hired Carter to be on his staff. They have worked together in the past. I mean, it was ridiculous. Carter has a terrible reputation. Why am I in the minority of not wanting to trade for Adams? Explain your reasoning. Saleh makes bad decisions, and he does. Rodgers was getting a beating, guys not picking up the blitz. Yeah, he got hit a lot, but ultimately he had plenty of plays where he had time to throw and he just was off. Go watch the film. He had tons and tons of plays where he had it. I mean, that was my issue last year too. As bad as the pass blocking was, the bigger issue was not taking advantage of opportunities when the pass blocking was there. Because again, there are plenty of quarterbacks who get sacked a bunch and still win. Joe Burrow is a classic example of that. Yeah, Saleh made a lot of bad decisions. That's why he's no longer a head coach. Exactly. Bates was about as clueless as you've ever seen a tight end. Bates should not be active. They should cut Bates right now. Sign Anthony Firkser to the active roster. Activate Kenny Abo. Do whatever you have to do, but do not. I mean, they have to change something. Frankly, Rucker shouldn't be on the team either at this point. Why am I still doing mock drafts in October with this franchise? I mean, at some point you have to just go back to the common denominator for the last 13 years, and that's Woody Johnson. Selling the team and getting their own stadium in Queens will save this franchise. I don't know about getting a new stadium in Queens, although, I mean, they could use a better stadium in MetLife, but selling the team might be a big thing. We all said the same thing watching the game. This again? Exactly. Rodgers, even with 3 interceptions, had a higher quarterback rating than Darnold. Exactly. It wasn't Darnold who won that game. Here, what's the hope anything changes when Hackett and the offensive line coach is still around? I mean, it's a good point. If Downing calls plays, hopefully something gets better. But and hopefully Ulbrich will tell them to make some obvious changes in scheme, even beyond the play calling. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. How the heck can we see the coaches are years ago, but Woody fired Saleh now? That's why it might all just come back to Woody. Rodgers is spent. I mean, he certainly could be with the way he's played the last 2 games. Rodgers' interview with McAfee seems very fake and orchestrated. Woody and him are lying. This won't end well. I mean, look, it could be. It certainly wouldn't be the first time Rodgers lied to the media. Wouldn't be the first time Woody lied to the media. And so it's certainly possible. It's definitely possible. I'm more inclined to take him at least somewhat at his word that he's okay with. I don't know about the Saleh firing part. I think he was involved in that. But that he's okay with them demoting Hackett and making Todd Downing the play caller. But yeah, I mean, look, the other stuff, I don't think he was telling the truth. Why does Belichick hate the Jets so much? You would think with age comes wisdom. I mean, not to get like so personal, but from one particular choice in Belichick's life, I think you pretty clearly see that with age does not come wisdom. On that note, we've been here for, let's see, I'm live for an hour and 14 minutes. I think we're good. Thank you so much for joining. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to jetsxfactor.com, discount code 80. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And thank you, and have a great day.